linkages, thank you all for coming. This is our final TASCHA talk for this quarter, and we'll be resuming again in January. So we're very happy to have Ricardo Gomez and Fernando Baron. There you are, right there, presenting their work on the work that they've done in Colombia over the past year. So I'll turn it over to those two. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. This presentation is being recorded, the audio of it. I asked if I should wear a nice shirt for it, because it's only recording the PowerPoint and the audio of it. So if you don't want your voice to be recorded, you need to do something and turn it off or leave a comment for after. I don't know what will be done with the recording afterwards. So with that, thank you all for coming. And when we were discussing with Chris what to do to be part of these TASCHA talks, we figured rather than wrapping up the landscape study, which is wrapping up right now, we give you a teaser of what is starting up rather than sunset, doing the sunrise of this project that is actually at high noon by now, because as a project, it emerges from the landscape study, the one that looked at public access venues in 25 countries. And I see some new faces around the room, so I'm not sure how much everybody knows about the kind of stuff that has been done. So I will assume that I need to provide some context for you guys. We did a study in 25 countries that included Colombia, of public access venues that was looking at libraries and telecenters and cyber cafes in all these different countries, trying to understand how can they be strengthened as venues that offer public access to computers and to ICTs with the intent of supporting community development. In this study, we did, it was fairly massive, looking at 25 countries. We did roughly 250 interviews in what we estimate covers or represents about 250,000 centers around the world. There were overall, spread across all the countries, about 25,000 survey respondents. And the numbers are not exact, but they're a very good approximation that say it was 25,123. So the metaphor about around the 25 is fairly compelling. We used a framework that came out of the Real Access framework developed in South Africa. And we took it and tweaked it and adapted it almost beyond recognition. So the resulting framework is what we're calling the ACE framework, for access, capacity, and environment. Looking at those three dimensions and not just at access. Many studies have looked only at access issues, where people access computers and how accessible they are. And we're looking at other things that are important to understand the phenomenon of using ICTs. So it has to do with access, but also with capacity and relevance, and also with the environment surrounding these things. So this is a high-level picture of what the access, capacity, and environment framework talks about. And there's a number of smaller level variables and indicators for each one of these bullet points up here. So for all countries, we did a detailed coding and analysis of all these, and it'll come up in a moment. Pay attention to this. So there, in 10 seconds, you have the result of the study of 25 countries. It was 3 years, almost to the day. We started early November, was when I started, but the team here had started a couple of months before. And to summarize it in 10 seconds of things coming on the slide was quite an interesting undertaking. We found a lot of things. There's a whole lot of things that I won't be going into a lot of detail about, but the bottom of the screen has the 9 major things that are the ones we captured in papers that we discussed and presented at different places, and they constitute part of a book that was just submitted last month to a publisher that will bring together all the results of that study. So there is 25 chapters, one for each one of the countries in the study, and then the 9 topics that are on the bottom of the screen. Each one is a chapter that analyzes those issues in the book, and then there is one 10th chapter that talks about the methodology of the study. So that will be coming soon to a bookseller near you or to a library near you. But based on this larger scale study, we decided, well, let's look at Colombia. Initially, we were going to do this in Honduras, not Colombia, but Honduras, and there was a coup. So we figured, well, let's not go there. And we didn't say anything in Colombia just to prevent the fact that there could be another coup when we said we're going to be doing it there. Causality is always an important thing. For comparison, take a look at some high-level statistics in the country. How it compares with USA for an American audience. But a more interesting comparison that we found is that the majority of the high-level numbers, including population and size and indices, are almost identical with South Africa. So one of the things we want to do next is try to do a comparable study like this one, going in more depth into the issues in South Africa, see if we can compare apples with apples. But let me stop here, take you to this place. One way of looking at access and ICTs in a country is through statistics. And this is an aggregate of statistics, and it gives us a picture of GDP and broadband subscribers. I'm sure you've seen this. This was put together by Richard Heeks and team, and it animates the change between 1998 and look at what happens when we select Colombia. It'd be fairly static for the most part, and then it starts to move toward the end. So there's a number of countries that had a dramatic increase in the relationship between broadband and GDP per capita, but Colombia did not move much, and in fact, many of the countries did not move much either. This is one type of story we could tell to understand what is going on with access to ICT and use of ICT in different countries, developing or not. Nonetheless, let me go back to, we want to tell you a different kind of story, not one that is so much based on numbers. So we went into the country and we figured, well, Colombia is fairly diverse. It has a very salient history of political violence. When people say, when did the violence in Colombia start? Well, the joke is it started back in the 1700s. The official period of la violencia, of violence, is between 49 and 56. But there was violence before that, and violence continues now, and there's different waves of violence. In a way, yet again, comparable to political violence in South Africa, even though the context is entirely different. South Africa is also a country that has seen a fair share of political violence, racial violence, in ways that race has not been such a strong element in Colombia. But we looked at the country and we used a study that had been done of community television that had divided up the country in 5 different regions to have some sort of statistical representation that addresses the diversity of the country, of cultural and geography in the country, and using that those criteria, we ended up dividing the country into 5 regions plus a capital city, and the whole southwestern part of the country, right around here, is very sparsely populated. It's mostly flatlands in the north and rainforest in the south. So those regions are added to the other regions with some formula to also account for some of the representation of that population with the others. With this, what did we do in the country? We conducted expert interviews, combining people from academia, from nonprofits, and from government, and with specialty on who knew about libraries and telecenters and cyber cafes. Especially libraries and telecenters. Cyber cafes is a field that is very, very understudied generally, but in Colombia in particular. We conducted operator interviews. Operators are the people who run and operate and face the public in these places. Sometimes they're librarians in libraries, sometimes it's staff or volunteers in libraries, sometimes it's staff or volunteers in the telecenters. In cyber cafes, they tend to be the clerks or the people who tend to the running and the operation of the cyber cafe. Frequently, it's run by their owners, owner-operated and maintained. So we conducted about 100 of those interviews. We conducted a survey with 1,337 valid responses. It's a statistically significant number, distributed around the country, including the 5 different regions, including urban and non-urban settings. In Colombia, they're called municipalidades or municipios for small towns up to a certain population. And for each region, we were looking at one big city, one small town, so that we have that point of comparison. And in each region, looking at libraries and telecenters and cyber cafes, so that there's distribution around all the country. We conducted 6 focus groups in which we would gather in a room much like this, a group about this size of people from the community who are users or stakeholders or have some relationship with public access in cyber cafes or telecenters or in libraries. And we get together and talk and have a facilitated conversation of about half a day on average in different parts of the country. Once again, sometimes in a big city, sometimes in a small town, covering all regions, plus the capital city, which is obviously the one that has the highest population. So a combination of method, and we also conducted a series of life history interviews, selecting one particularly interesting individual to talk about their life history, what motivated them to get using ICTs, and what kind of changes it has brought about in their lives, to get a lot of depth in the detailed account of somebody's history and experience with it. So with this combination of tools, we have the breadth of a survey that gives us a blanket coverage of what's happening in the country with a statistical representation that gives us a lot more confidence to talk about this than we had for any of the reports of the landscape study, because we did not have statistically significant surveys in any of the countries. And when talking about what we found, there was constantly a limitation of not being able to talk about it with that much more confidence. So in this case, we've dealt with that by having a fairly robust, statistically significant survey. And in the survey, we did something kind of unique, and that is not only asking the standard closed questions or give me option A, B, C, or D, but we also included in particular one open-ended question. And that is fairly bold to include in a survey of 1,300 people or 1,200 people. Tell me, how has access to computers changed your life? How has this changed your life? Doing it in a way that is not leading, it's not asking, give me option A, B, or C, or has it been in this regard or in that regard. No, just talking about it briefly, short, and asking the people who are helping us on the ground do the survey to record half of them, ask permission to record half of them, and the other half of them take notes, quick notes of them. So we have the combination of the detailed accounts transcribed verbatim and the notes as interpreted quickly on the fly by the person taking the survey. So we have about 900 responses, about half of them fairly detailed, and the other half more sketchy notes, which give us a very interesting picture. And they give us a picture that I want to spend more time with, because we're not trying to measure the benefit or the impact by some external measure of looking at statistics or looking at a number of responses and then interpreting from that what the impact is. We're just asking the people, how has this changed your life? And taking from that, what kind of things are we hearing? What kind of things are they talking about? So I want to talk a bit more about that. For that, this is a picture of what is the distribution of venues in Colombia. And counting venues is a difficult thing, as you all know. Libraries are, the numbers about libraries are fairly easy to get to. And even then, it's difficult, because there's different types of libraries and different ways that the people count them. But in Colombia, we found the exact same number on the first iteration of the landscape study that included Colombia, and in the more recent study that was done in Colombia, both found the exact same number of libraries. So we said, oh, okay, that one's good. Telecenters, we found about twice the number of telecenters reported now than we had in the first iteration of the landscape study. So somehow, it's not that they had doubled in the course of a year, is that somehow they were missed or the people did not do a very thorough job in doing the study. The first iteration of the landscape study in Colombia was the weakest, I should have said earlier. We wanted to do it on Honduras for other reasons. We dropped Honduras and we ended up going to Colombia, in part because it was a very weak report. It was not very complete, and it had many, many problems. So we're finding the implications of that at this level. But where it's especially striking is in the number of cyber cafes, because this is about 10 times more than the team had reported of the cyber cafes just a year and a half before. And once again, it's not that there has been a proliferation of 10 times the cyber cafes in that short time, it's that they were not paying attention. So with about 15,000 cyber cafes, which is 10 times the numbers of libraries and about 5 or 6 times the number of telecenters, the shape of the distribution, if you notice the top chart and the bottom chart, is roughly the same. And the bottom chart is the distribution in the global study. The number of libraries and the number of telecenters is roughly the same, a bit more telecenters than libraries, and then there is a way bigger number of cyber cafes. What does this tell us about the landscape of public access? It's dominated by cyber cafes. So those of us who lived in the illusion that telecenters were going to make a difference, well, not if they work alone. Those of us who were thinking that libraries were the ones making the difference, no, not if they work alone. Because cyber cafes, working outside the parameters of community development, information access, and all the ideology and public service and support to development and all these, are what is dominating public access to computers and to technology. I would not be surprised if this is what you're finding in the global landscape study as well, in the global impact study, as you start getting data of the inventory. I'm seeing faces nodding. And I don't know how exact the shape of the distribution, the percentage of them, but I thought it was very striking to find the similarity in the shapes. So it is not similar to the distribution that we had in the early study of Colombia, but it is similar to the average of all the 25 countries. So with that, we need to take these charts with a grain of salt, because this is the result of the analysis of access, capacity, and environment in Colombia based on the preliminary results of the first phase of the study, which, as we have now just seen, do not include 90% of cyber cafes and do not include about 50% of telecenters. Yes?
Look, just quickly, Ricardo, can I ask whether how did you ask about a cyber cafe? And might that have been an issue in the other countries because of the definition you used?
The definitions were the same.
But if you went to the other countries, might you find there are really 10 times as many as it got identified?
I'm sorry, say it again?
You're assuming it has to do with the sloppiness of the team in Colombia. I just wondered if these places are often hard to ferret out, and you might find that in other countries as well.
Yes. The type of vendor is the most difficult to have an accurate estimate of is cyber cafes, because they're not necessarily registered. There's no association. There is no common body. Many of them operate without a license to operate a cyber cafe. There is no such a thing.
I mean, my impression in Bangladesh as well was that they tried to go by a formal definition, and all you had to do was walk down the block and you found others. That it wasn't a matter. If you went from a formal list in any country, you deceived yourself. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just sloppiness in Colombia, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm just wondering. I'm asking.
It's possible, and I'm not saying that in our current estimate is the absolute truth, but it is a more informed truth number done with what we think is a bit more care. The thing is, in the early stage of the Colombia study, there are many other indicators of sloppiness in the way that research was done. I don't have to go into details, but there were many things that were done incomplete. So this just adds to it. But your point is good. The definition that you use for a particular venue and what you're looking for changes the color of what you find. But in the case of cyber cafes, you talk about the definition. Many people were differentiating, and we early on we tried to have this discussion to clarify the distinction between especially telecenters and cyber cafes. The difference is not whether they charge a fee or not, because there are many telecenters that charge fees, and there are many cyber cafes that do not charge fees for use of computers. They charge for the food, or they charge for other things, and from that they recoup the money. And there's telecenters that do charge fees. So fees is not what differentiates one and the other. We ended up settling on what differentiates them is the intent. Are they set up as a non-profit business whose intent is to support in some way or with some definition of community development or local development or information access or some public service discourse? Or is it as a business that today could be offering hamburgers and tomorrow, or today is offering computers and tomorrow could be offering hamburgers? Is it a business that is offering access to computers and it might have an unintended consequence on development, but that is not its intent, that is not its design. So it's more along the lines of for-profit, not-for-profit, but differentiate cyber cafes and telecenters.
Which is in itself a very interesting finding, because in the development world, we always think about cyber cafes as fee-driven and telecenters as free.
But they're not necessarily.
I know, but they are not necessarily.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I'll speak to that a bit more. Well, since you introduced it right now, because I didn't include the slide. I'll get to this in a moment. But in one of the chapters that we have in the book analyzing the landscape study, we talk about the issue of fees, because we don't seem to find a lot of evidence that fees drive people to choose one or the other, or the lack of fees. So, yes, libraries are free for the most part, or almost always, and cyber cafes generally charge a fee, and telecenters are halfway through, or in between. And we don't find any indication that that variable drives people to choose one over another. There's other things that are way more important than fees. Nonetheless, in Colombia, where we have a discrete country, and the other one we're looking at aggregate data from multiple countries, in Colombia, we do find a very clear chart that I don't have here, so that's why I'm talking it. I thought about including it, but I didn't want to derail the talk. So thank you for asking me to derail it. I love this opportunity. Where we do find a relationship between no income and low income bracket users use more libraries and less cyber cafes and telecenters in the middle, while medium income users use more cyber cafes and less libraries. And the shape of the chart is like that, which we did not find in the global analysis. So I was just telling Melody, it's great to find evidence to contradict our own findings from before.
Thank you.
Yeah?
Oh,
So even though in the global study we didn't find that kind of relationship, in Colombia we did find a stronger relationship between income and choice of venues, which is an interesting contradiction on the other, because the other one is very puzzling to say, well, there's no difference. Does that mean then, well, libraries should be charging? Could be charging without making a difference? Well, maybe. Because part of the issues that libraries are facing sustainability challenges and cash flow problems and things. So, let me come back to this. Access, capacity, and environment in Colombia in relation to the 25 countries. Result of a detailed coding of all those different variables that I mentioned before, where the capacity in telecenters seems to be higher than in libraries and cyber cafes, but the environment in Colombia seems to be more conducive, more supportive of telecenters, red bar here, than of libraries and especially of cyber cafes. In Colombia, there is a lot of interest in the telecenter, Compartel, government-sponsored variety of telecenters, and only this year, with the approval of a new law for libraries, they're asking libraries to catch up and do this, and to do it in partnership with the Ministry of ICTs, because libraries depend on the Ministry of Culture. So there is less of an environment for libraries and more of an environment for telecenters, and I think that is a reflection of this tension between Ministry of ICTs, Ministry of Culture. Ministry of ICT has goodwill and money and funding, Ministry of Culture doesn't. Law of Library says, you figure it out with them, go talk to them and find out how you can collaborate with them. So is that conducive with what you found, Andy?
Well, time changes, but I would say the question I would ask is whether the success of computer use in libraries has provoked this change in the law. That is to say, people notice everybody come to the library. We're going to get the ICT community involved in this, and not just the cultural group.
And that might be true, especially because of the case of a couple of large, very successful libraries in Bogotá and Medellin. Not so much in all the collection of small, poor, and poorly equipped libraries in the country, which is what the new law is trying to say, bring them all to up to speed in this. Access, on the other hand, if we look at the first one, seems to be higher and as a composite measure for cyber cafes than for the others. Maybe for the reasons that we're talking about. There's more of them, even though the study did not include 90% of them. But they seem to provide better access to ICT through cyber cafes than through the others. And on the other side, on your right side of the screen, you see how they compare with the global averages of the 25 countries. So this is an interesting point of comparison between where Colombia stands in relation to comparable measures of access, capacity, and environment for telecenters and libraries and cyber cafes in relation to the rest of the country. But I told you that I was not going to be talking to you stories of numbers. I want to tell you stories about what people do. On the left-hand side here, we have the chart of the bubbles, the floating bubbles that I just animated for you. And I forgot that. Let me see if you can hear this from this little speaker. I want to show to you all this is to say, we prefer to hear the voices of people than to hear them represented in numbers.
Las nuevas tecnologías han cambiado mi vida de la manera que uno está más actualizado, más acorde de los temas que se están tratando y tiene una mayor capacidad de investigar más profundamente los temas que se necesitan consultar. Debido a que en el tiempo anterior no se tenía la facilidad o acceso a un libro con mayor capacidad de información. Se tenía que esperar mucho tiempo para solicitar una cita para sí mismo el préstamo de ese libro. Se necesitaba desplazarse a distancias muy lejanas, reservando una cierta cantidad de dinero para poder cubrir la necesidad del transporte. Se necesitaba también dejar una reserva para las copias.
Okay. So what this woman is saying is, this has changed my life. Before I needed to spend more time, go get a book, wait, pay to make photocopies, and what was the very first thing? I was paying attention to the tinkering. Do you remember?
Access to information.
Access to way more sources of information than I had before. Yeah? So, part of the issue that we're facing now is all our data is collected in Spanish. In the landscape study, all the data was collected in local languages, but we received reports in English, and all the reports of the landscape study are available in English. All the data we have here is in Spanish. And so with the team that we've been working on this, there's been some very interesting experimentation on using machine translation for all the transcripts of the interviews that have been coded on Atlas TI and all. But so we go parse through them and then do a machine translation so that those on the team who do not speak as good Spanish can still get to it for understanding. We're not going to be publishing papers that are machine translated, but for understanding of what they say, it's really useful. One of the other indicators of the poor quality of the Colombia study, several sections of it were very evidently raw machine translation, Google translation, in the report itself. So, among other things.
When you say machine translation, you mean like Google Translate?
Yes, machine translation, online translation.
I was just picturing like this stuff.
No, the thing is Phil falls a little bit deep. Phil falls a little bit deep, and he's been using Microsoft, whatever the Microsoft machine translation, what is it called? Remember?
I think it's just the inside word they have like being translated, embedded into.
But it goes to a server at Microsoft and comes back translated. So, we say the Google translation to mean any generic online translation.
Actually, they've been compared recently, and Google is better in almost every language and improving at a faster rate than the others.
Yes, but I'm trying to honor the network platform neutrality of the language,
the G word,
and not use Kleenex but the facial tissue. and that kind of things.
I just like the term machine translation.
Machine translation. So that was the first comment out of this one. The second comment is we have all these statements of people telling us it has done this. So what do we do next? Well, we cluster it, we group it, we analyze it, we go through it again, and we ended up with 12 categories of things. These are the kind of things that people are telling us about how ICTs have changed their life or how using computers in a public space has changed their life. And the wording of the question was not always exact, so it's, I use them in both ways. The top four are, in fact, the ones that are the most frequent ones. I'll show you the frequencies in a moment, but all the things that people are telling us, 879 responses, plus 5 or 10 that the transcriptions made no sense. It says just some jumble or mumble, and we couldn't really make out what they were saying. But overall, from 800 and something responses, we could group them into these 12 categories of things. Having to do with fast and easy, with more information, with meeting and maintaining friends, with education opportunities, and then at a second level, with changes in daily life, with contribution to jobs and transactions and paperwork, and we ended up grouping jobs and transactions because there was not as much as we thought there would be in relation to jobs. There is some, but if it was alone, it would be almost negligible. So grouped together with transactions, it comes up. A sense of connectedness, a sense of being part of a larger world and being better connected to others in a larger world, which is different from staying close to friends and family. A sense of being part of progress, not being left behind, of progress being inevitable, and now we're part of it. We're part of the information society. A sense of new media. Before we used to do things this way, now we do this. Before it was going to the library or watching TV or calling friends on the phone or writing letters, and right now it's all online or it's all on the screen. Learning ICTs. To our surprise, very little of it. Some, but very little. In fact, the least of it is learning ICT. Being in public access centers, which presumably would be the gateway to new people to use of ICT. The least frequently reported benefit is learning the ICT. Some negative issues of the type of, well, it takes up my time, or I'm spending more time in stupid things, or there is more of a sense of addiction, and now I need to do more, and I would rather do without, or privacy and security, and hackers and viruses, and not knowing where my private information is going, a bit. And, much to our surprise, very little on games and entertainment. Even though we were expecting to find a lot more of entertainment, very little in the self-reported. Yes?
These are benefits stated, not uses?
Benefits, yes.
Okay.
Yes, uses are different. This is how, to the question of how has using ICT changed your life?
Okay.
Or how has using computer changed your life?
So this is just the open-ended one,
Yes.
from the closed.
Yes,
The closed,
yes, yes.
yeah.
Okay.
Yes. No, the closed responses to users and to types of users and all that, I'm not addressing here, but we can talk about that.
Because there the games would be much higher, obviously,
Yes.
in uses.
Yes.
But
Yes.
this is how that benefited.
Yes. So how do they look in terms of by frequency? And know that those 12 categories of things, when we went back to assign each one of the responses to them, they're not unique. So one single response, like the one of the woman who recording I played, has at least 3. We assign them to maximum 3 things. We rarely find something that we want to assign to more. So they can be in 1 or 2 or 3 places. So the total number of these is more than 879. Because there's some duplication. They're not discrete categories. Nonetheless, what it tells us is, number one, the most important, the most salient perceived benefit is more access to more information. How surprising is that? We get more access to more information, gives us more sources, gives us faster, quicker, easier, cheaper. That would be on the third one. But the second one has to do with friends. So number one is more information. So it's almost so obvious that we could just eliminate it because it's all of its own weight. But number two is this relationship with friends and with family. And not just maintaining relationship with friends. There's a lot of emphasis in making new friends. Not just keeping in contact with people that I had lost touch with from school or relatives and friends who are far away. No, there is a lot of insistence on making new friends.
It's just Facebook friends.
It's online friends. It might be Facebook, it might be chat, and Facebook once again is a generic because in Colombia there is a lot of use of High Five and of another of those portals. MySpace. Orkut is more in Brazil. They talk about Facebook, MySpace, High Five, and another one. You remember which is the other one?
No.
Okay, there's another one. So we say Facebook is generic for social networking things.
But it's not making friends in the world through online processes. It's making online friends.
Friends that you will never see in real life, yes.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because it warrants some further digging into because it's a redefinition of what you mean by friends. And what you mean by maintaining friends and having more friends. And is it just more numbers of friends? What happens to the quality of the friends or the relationships? Or there are some that say, well, I go to MySpace and I see what my friends are doing and I send them a message and I feel happy. Things like that. That is.
This is really great, Ricardo. I think as you reanalyze, as you look deeper, you should separate out the extent to which it's part of the way in which you relate to the friends you already have.
Yes.
Versus this, because
That's
it's a
why-
very different phenomenon.
Yeah, that's why I point out that there is a very important component of making new friends and not just maintaining the friends you already have. Yeah, but it's all related to the bigger theme of friends. So, and the bigger theme of friends is number 2 after more information, which is so obvious that for me it's almost irrelevant. But to have the next top item be friends, including those 2 dimensions of friends, for me is super revealing. Yes.
Related, was there separation of family and friends, or did family feature separately in any identifiable way?
Many times they just say family and friends as if in a single long word. Familia y amigos. No, it doesn't strike us as an important distinction for many of them. But since you asked, we can look at it again. We have all the data, so we can easily go through them and say, and maybe you cannot see the numbers, but I differentiated by telecenter, cybercafe, and library. The proportions remain the same roughly, that there's way more of cybercafes because the numbers of cybercafes are higher, but the proportions of them are more or less the same, except in a couple of cases that I'll talk about in a moment. But
are families generally dispersed or live at a close quarters where they wouldn't need a mediated form of communication?
I would say I'm trying to imagine where you're coming from with the question too. If you compare it with context of extended families in parts of Africa, the extended family has been very broken down in Colombia compared to that. If you compare it with the status of extended families in the U.S., they're super united. There has been displacement because of the war, and there has been displacement because of economic reasons. So there's a lot of internal migration and migration out of the country. Many mention relatives outside of the country, in Venezuela, in the U.S., in Spain, and other places. So there has been a lot of displacement, but I don't think I would have enough information to talk about the demographics of family composition in the country. But maybe that helps. Yes? 1, 2?
Were they first?
No.
This is very interesting to me. The first 4 changes they think in their lives, with the exception of the fast and easy, were the same changes that we found for immigrant women in Europe. We asked a very similar question, not related to public access venues, related to ICT, but were the same information, communication, friends and family, social networks, and educational opportunities.
So the first 4, including the information and fast and easy. Okay.
Not the fast and easy, that one doesn't.
The 4th one for you would be the new media?
Actually, we didn't have, jobs will be like the fast and easy.
This is not very different from the U.S. impact study of libraries. If you look at the findings there, They have sliced them in a different way because it had policy implications, but it is not entirely surprising. We're finding a lot of recent corroboration of this kind of trend. Yeah.
Probably too many interruptions, Kurt. This melody had the same problem. But is it okay if we interrupt?
Yes. This is a lot more interesting then.
You said, of course, many more of these are from cyber cafes because there are many more cyber cafes.
Yeah,
so that asked me something I didn't understand about your method. The number of interviews is proportional to the number of venues in each category.
Yes.
So there are many more interviews in cyber cafes.
There are, yes.
And you might find a different set of answers in libraries and what people are there for example, for training.
We're probing for that and we don't find a lot.
Okay.
But yes, we're trying to figure out how to deal with the difference in numbers, and we have more respondents from cyber cafes than libraries. What is reported in cyber cafes would appear to be more important or salient than what is reported in libraries. And so, well, statistically, numerically, there's something to take into account there, and so we're dealing with that. But also we're looking at the quality of the things, and we don't find a lot of variation. The only one that we do find variation, let me skip to that one, is on, last one there, the learning ICTs. So let me speak about the last one first, because it is the one in which the cyber cafe proportion is way smaller, even though numerically there's way more cyber cafes. Just the number here is only 10 for cyber cafes, 9 for libraries, and 14 for telecenters for learning ICTs. So in that case, the kind of thing that you're mentioning kind of expands that way more. Proportionately, people are learning how to use ICTs way more in libraries and in telecenters than in cyber cafes. Because the number of respondents that we have was so much higher in cyber cafes, and that higher proportion is not reflected here. So it's not reverse compensation there. Yeah? So that's something to take into consideration. Even though it is the least reported, it is far less frequent in cyber cafes. People don't tend to go to a cyber cafe to learn how to use ICTs, even though some of them do, or do report that that is something that has happened to them. It happens more as a result of their use of telecenters and not libraries. Yeah? Okay.
Did you by any chance ask them where did they learn, or do they learn?
There was no follow-up questioning
Well, I mean,
in the survey.
meaning in the main survey, in the closed-ended questions, was there a question that addressed that?
No.
Maybe
But learning about ICT does not seem to be a huge benefit, which is surprising. We would have expected that to be number 3 or 4 in this ranking.
Yeah, it seems like you could easily take this chart and just divide it by the count and get a percentage as opposed to a raw count. And I can see from here that there's different focuses depending on the use of different venues. I think that's fascinating.
The one where it's more salient is in the last one of learning ICT.
Even Friends
overall,
is surprising.
Friends is huge because that's going to be the 5th or 6th one if it were not.
Well, that one there's a circle here. I wanted to speak about that one. This is the other one where there is, if you drew a line between the boundaries of this, here there's a dip, and then it just continues to. But
I guess
maybe there too.
What I'm saying is don't draw a line. Divide by the count, and then we can look at the proportions side by side. And then I think there's going to be a huge spike on Friends for.
Maybe I'll get back to you on how to handle these numbers, because I want to make sure that I do something that does not take away from the numbers. Dividing it by the count of what?
By the count of the number of people that responded.
That responded to that one. So divided by this total. Okay. So this number becomes a percentage of this count.
No, but by the number of people that said that in each venue. So
yeah,
then you get the frequency per venue.
Okay.
Per topic.
Okay, we'll talk about it more. Yes, Elizabeth?
Is it clear that learning ICT is separate from education?
Yes. Yes, one of them, I learned to use a computer. I did not know how to use the mouse, and now I can use the mouse. I did not know what the internet was, and now I can go and navigate. Here in education, it's more, it's homework and research for school and that kind of thing, but it's also learning about new stuff, learning about new things happening. It's a very lifelong learning theme that appears. It's not just doing homework, but it is very clearly different from learning ICT, learning to use the computer. Yes, sir.
Again, to put that in context, did you have any information on their prior skill in ICT use?
Of these particular people?
Yeah.
No.
So it could be that they did not need to learn because they already.
Yeah, but it's a sample of users of public venues. So we don't know each one of those, where they learned, what else they had done that morning, we don't know that. We just know what these people who were exiting a public access venue after having presumably used it, said about how it has changed their life.
I think that would be useful, and obviously you can't go back and get that information from them, but a useful way of putting some of these into context. And if you want to know if learning has increased, and to understand this, it would be great if we also knew what their prior skill level was, even if it's self-assessed.
So the things we can do is contrast all this with their level of education, with their income, with their age, with their occupation, with whether it's a library or telecenter or cyber cafe, with whether it's a big city, small town, whether it's a north or south or east or west, capital city, all that kind of things we can do.
And maybe even using the uses. You said that you capture as proxy to understand, to put this into context.
Yes, we also ask them, what do you look for in these places?
Exactly.
What do you do in these places? And those are two different things, as we have seen in other studies as well. Let me talk a bit about, the one I want to mention here, the friends. It does seem that in blue libraries, there is a lot less of staying in touch with friends or meeting new friends than in the others. Just like in cyber cafes, proportionally, there is a lot less of opportunities for learning ICTs. Those are two salient things. I will try out the percentages thing to see how to represent this in a more compelling way. The shape is still the same, but the numbers will be presented.
They're different questions.
No?
It's not one versus the other, really. It's this, and there's this within venues. Really interesting, different questions.
Yeah, it is.
We're doing that. This is a pivot table, by the way, so it's very easy to manipulate and to make it show different things. I want to talk a bit about the new media thing, and that is the before it used to be this, going to the library or watching TV or the radio, and now it's this. We started, it was an interesting phenomenon to detect in this 12 categories of things. How does it speak to us? Until we started noticing there is something fishy about the way this is happening, because looking at the transcript, since it was the transcript of only this question in the survey, the rest of the questions of the survey were not recorded. They were written down on the survey instrument. We started noticing that some of those had a bit of the question asked or implied how the question was asked, and we started thinking, I get the feeling that somebody was asking, tell me how was this before and how was it after. So we actually analyzed, compared by interviewers. There's 20 interviewers in the country, and lo and behold, we found that interviewer number 6 generated the majority of those responses of the new media, the before and after. So it's most likely somebody who decided not to follow the training and the manual that we have given them. No, not these. Somebody who lives in the vicinity of Medellin and who decided to ask the question, so how was this before and how is it now? So the question led to a lot of answers of this type. So if we exclude the answers of that one, this one becomes very comparable to the others. So it becomes the new media becomes just as high as the daily life and the connectedness or thereabouts. It's not as high as it appears to be here.
Can you give
So
us an
interesting phenomenon to discover.
So why don't you do that?
I'm sorry?
Why don't you do that as part of the data management process?
Because then I have to explain it each time, and
I mean, you're taking out
it's
the
a conversation too.
You're taking out the errors.
Well, it's nice to have it like that.
I don't know.
I don't know. I just raised it.
I kind of like.
I mean, I can analyze it and I can comment on it on analysis, but the data is this.
So what example were they giving by new media? Like what kind of?
It's mostly from I used to go to the library, now I get my reading online. I used to listen to the news on the radio or on TV, now I get them online. I used to write letters to my friends, now I write email. I used to call my friends on the phone, now we use chat or Skype or something.
Very interesting, though.
Which is interesting. But we found that somebody was asking a leading question in relation to that, which doesn't invalidate it for the other 19 interviewers. So it is something that is salient, but it is skewed in one of them, which makes what in my mind makes it more interesting, because it makes a very distinct group of the first 4, and then a distinct group of the rest, or the other 6, which have more or less the same weight of frequency of thinking. Now, we lost the numbers here. The connectedness one here is one that we're specifically analyzing some more now, because it's an area that has a lot of potential to try to establish a connection between these benefits and community development. Because other than education, which you can say, well, education is part of development and all this, and contributing to education, lifelong learning, or homework, or research, or doing things online, or doing submitted papers online, or that kind of thing. All the others don't seem to have an easy connection to the discourse of development. Yes, more information is a good thing, having more friends is a good thing, and communicating with friends, and changing daily life, and the negative thing we need to be mindful of. But this issue of connectedness, of having a stronger sense of belonging to a larger world, and being a more active part of a larger world, is something that we think has a lot of potential as an important aspect to strengthen and to encourage in the use of ICTs for development. People are not necessarily gaining a lot of benefit of preventing AIDS or curing diarrhea, which is kind of the early discourse of ICTs and development. The market prices, well, it's mostly urban, even if small town urban. It's not really a rural phenomenon, the public access to ICT. So the market prices of potatoes, well, it's still on the radio at 5 o'clock in the morning. You don't go to the health center or somewhere to find out what the market prices of things were. So the kind of things that we have been looking for in terms of benefits of ICTs are a lot more subtle. And the kind of things that people are telling us are the benefits that they perceive seem to be at a distance, not necessarily at odds, but distant from the kind of things that we have been looking for in terms of contribution to development. Where is the contribution to income and to jobs? Well, jobs we have to put together with transactions and paperwork, because, yes, some people say they can look for a job. I am unemployed now, so I can look for a job. I can look for jobs online, and I can send my resume, and I don't have to spend time and go all the way there. But it's fairly minimal compared to all the other things. The connectedness issue is one that might have a lot of potential to explore further, because it offers us gateways into issues in development that have been talked about in the development world for a long time, for the most part ignored in the ICT4D discourse, and that is things that have to do with empowerment and with building of social capital. So people who report having a stronger image of self, a stronger sense of belonging to a larger world, and a stronger sense of interacting with a wider world. My world used to be Cali alone, and now I know about what things are happening in Spain and in the US, one of them says. That kind of things is powerful. That kind of stuff is important. And how do we capitalize and how do we tap that to strengthen it and to encourage it in ways that help us realize that into and as part of development benefits, I think is a very interesting avenue to look for.
I agree fully with that. I think one of the challenges we also have is trying to weigh something that is a frequent occurrence versus something that's episodic. Mm-hmm. Because yes, I want to go connect to my friends every day or every week, but hopefully I'm not looking for a job every day or every week. And obviously, if you're asked how has it changed, obviously you're thinking of things that are happening on a daily basis. Yeah. Much more than that time I had to look up, some health information because I had a disease. Mm-hmm. Yes, it was very important. So it's hard to say what's, so we have, how do we deal with that challenge of things that might be very significant but episodic?
That's a really important way to put it, I think. I mean, if I were to come back to you and say, you just said this is very powerful and important, tell me why. It's very numerous, is what I now know. It's much more numerous.
It's not very numerous.
Well, no, it's communication. It's much more numerous than the others.
Yes.
And so you say it's powerful and important. Why?
Regular, frequent. Yeah.
What makes that important? Just because there are a lot of them.
What we're doing with that issue is, remember this is results of the survey. But we have interview data, and we have focus group data, and we have interviews with operators, and we have interviews with experts, and we have interviews with people telling us in depth about their life experience. So, for example, we have, even in survey data, with the random people who are coming out of these venues, there's 2 or 3 who talk about having a disability and having had computers and the internet help them not overcome the disability, but work with it and learn about it and find out about medications and treatments and be in touch with other people who have that disability. And there's a few of those in the survey. But in the in-depth interviews, we also have a person with a disability who talks about her experience in great detail and great depth about how it changes her experience of being a person with a disability. So by combining sources, right now I'm giving you only results of survey, but when we combine with other sources and we combine with data that comes from in-depth interviews, that is what gives us the texture and the order of magnitude. And yes, it might not be very frequent, but when I needed a job, that's where I went for it. Yeah. Or, yes, I'm glad that I'm not looking for a thing about this life-threatening condition every day. Every day I want to be just chatting and hanging around with my friends, but when I do, I could find it there.
So the frequency is different than importance.
So we can use the survey as one point of one source of data, but interviews and in-depth interviews of life experience as another source to give us the texture for those things in a way that the survey alone could not.
Just what was the average age is a bad question to ask, but do you have like representation from all age groups? Because that could have also affected that, right?
Yes, I didn't include it because I made the mistake of using the same, if you recall, in the landscape study, the way that the data came back on the user surveys, age was jumbled in a way that did not allow us to differentiate anything between 15 and 35. And I was having a bad day on the day that I was asked this, and I said, well, let's use that same one, and we use that same one, so it's a useless grid for age. Because yes, the great majority of users are between 15 and 35, but we don't have the detail within that. It would be a lot better to have between 15 and 25.
So you have some context though still.
But the majority of the users are what we call young and young adults, between 15 and 35. There's very, very few that are over 60, and I didn't include the chart. But I hope next time we do this, we will overcome that limitation again. And we're starting to do in South Africa. We already changed that to make sure that we do have a stopping point between 15 and 35. The majority of them are between 15 and 35. In interview data, we could not interview anybody underage because of IRB restrictions, so we don't have any younger than 18 or 17 in the interview data. Okay? So to wrap up, we're right on the cusp of time. The kind of things that we're doing based on this, we're looking deeper to see if other things that we found in the landscape study hold here or not. We're looking deeper at another number of issues, and we're corroborating with not just survey, but with interview data and going across all this. And sometimes with the interview data, machine translated and all that, so that we can have that the sense of what is going on. And we want to continue strengthening this idea of what are the theoretical and methodological tools, the conceptual underpinnings of talking about perceived impact, and not the extrapolated impact or the impact as a measure of economic growth or statistical indicators of impact. So. That's one thing we want to be exploring more, and I wanted to have a bit more of time to see if that's something that any one of you here at TASCHA or elsewhere is working on or interested in exploring more, this notion of perceived impact, and as experienced or as described by the beneficiaries or the victims themselves. Other things that we're talking about doing, we started doing this study of a comparable nature in South Africa using a similar battery of instruments, doing it with Sean Pather, who spent some time on a sabbatical here, and I just spent a few days with him there. And I'm talking to Dave Henry, who's doing work on youth homeless here in the U District, and it'd be super interesting to do something comparable or identical to see if there's anything that speaks to the phenomenon of homeless youth here in Seattle in relation to the kind of thing that we're talking about in Colombia. So that's it.
And where's that last quote from?
I like that quote.
Oh, that's one of the operators of a small library in Medellin, I think, who says, you know, well, we have all these books and all people want is that one stupid machine that is broken half the time. With a sense of frustration that what they want to offer is all this, but people don't care about all that. They all want to pile up on the computer.
That's funny. Very nice.
Okay. So if I can put in a plug-in for a couple of things, we will have a poster tonight at the research fair where we'll be talking about the role of infomediaries, a bit of the impact, and a bit of the connectedness issue. That's on the poster tonight. And Fernando is going to be talking tomorrow at Change about one of the...
Next Thursday.
Oh, not tomorrow, but next week. Okay, not tomorrow, a week from tomorrow at Change, on one of the case studies that emerges in this study, a community with a strong history of violence, strong history of community organization, where we were looking for, okay, so how have community organizations appropriated ICTs through the new offerings of public access to ICT, and how has it contributed to development? And the answer is, come here next week.
Terrific. Thank you very much. This is terrific.
It's so interesting that you found the same four things that, you know, the context is completely different.
That is it.
I mean, we didn't ask about public access, we asked about ICT. But it's just interesting.
And in the US impact study, it's the same.
And here it's online.
Some of the not very the connectedness, so the feeling part of a larger world, and we heard that in some instances. We didn't phrase it in the same way, but we heard that.
Alex is
No, but are you stopping the recording?
go ahead if you want to go.
No, but you can stop the recording now. How do we do that?
Why don't you just...
Hey, how are you? Good.
This is my...
All right.
Hang on, let me just take a
Just to see it.
1 hour, 2 minutes.
All right.
No.